And welcome back to another episode of the Sanctified Podcast. And real quick, before we get started, I just want to say I'm recording. There is a storm outside, so if you hear any thunder or anything, there might be some sounds in the background. And with that out of the way, let's get to the show. And today, we're going to explore the life of Saint Rita, an abused woman destined for greatness. Rita's full name was Margherita Lodi, and she was born in Roccaporena, Italy in 1381. She was part of a miracle, really, before she could even walk. As an infant, the day right after her baptism, actually, a swarm of bees surrounded her, and they flew in and out of her mouth while she was crying. But Rita was uninjured. There wasn't a single sting on her body. Her family instantly took this as a sign that Rita was already under God's protection and believed that their child was basically marked by God with this event. Even though her parents believed that she was destined for great things in her faith, they didn't let her join a convent when she wanted to. Instead, they made her marry Paolo Mancini, part of a pretty wealthy family at the time, but he had a very vicious reputation. When she was just 12 years old, she was sent off on this arranged marriage, and she became a mother to her first child with Paolo. Poor Rita really couldn't do much because in this time period, that's just kind of how things were. She had to just go on and take abuse from Paolo's furious temper and sit back while he chased interest in other women. Though many people disliked Paolo, so it's not like her suffering went unnoticed. Paolo was a generally disliked guy. But remember, Rita wanted to join a convent, so she was very devoted, and this devotion continued within her marriage. Eventually, she actually managed to change Paolo, and she turned him into a better person. Paolo dropped an old family feud between the Mancinis and the Ciuchis, but unfortunately it was a little too late because not long after, the feud between the Mancinis and the Cascios reached a boiling point, and Paolo was killed. In true fashion to her kindness, for the kindness that she showed her husband that eventually turned his life around, she publicly pardoned her husband's murderers. But Paolo's brother, he didn't hold the same sentiments. He actually encouraged his nephews, Rita and Paolo's sons, to seek revenge. And Rita had to endure the pain of seeing her boys become more and more like the terrible man their father once was and not the man he came to be. And she was deeply troubled by it. And she didn't want her sons to commit the sin of murder because in her eyes, and as was generally accepted at this time, it was an irredeemable sin. So, knowing that they were resolved to seek revenge, she did the only thing that she could think of. She prayed to God to save her boys before they could follow through with their plot and commit that horrible sin. Within a year, both of her boys passed away to dysentery, and many people interpret this as an answer to her prayers since they were unable to complete their revenge plot and therefore unable to perform the sin of murder. Man, she had a pretty tough life, like right off the get-go, especially because by the time this was all said and done, she was just over 30 years old. She managed to turn her husband around from the vicious person and abusive man he once was, only for him to be killed. And then her sons started straying from their moral compass, and she lost both of them to a sickness. Now, whether it actually was for the better or not, the argument really could be made either way. I guess I would lean towards it probably was for the better because they didn't perform the sin of murder. But Rita took all this loss as a sign and used it as a signal pointing her to join a convent like she always wanted to do all those years ago. She asked to join the monastery of St. Mary Magdalene in Cascia, but they denied her request. And it wasn't because she wasn't devoted enough or they thought she wasn't devoted enough. Quite the contrary, actually. But they felt that her late husband's feuds were far too volatile to become involved in any way, shape, or form. But she was persistent. And she was told finally that she would be invited into the monastery if she could quell the rivalry between the Mancinis, her husband's family, and the Ciuchis, the family that killed her husband. Rita prayed to John the Baptist, Augustine of Hippo, who actually has a really cool story, and I'm working on a separate episode for him, and Nicholas of Tolentino for help. At this time, the bubonic plague was spreading throughout Italy, and it finally made its way to the Mancini family. Bernardo Mancini, Paolo's brother and now basically head of the Mancini family, became infected, and he ultimately did away with the feud. He realized that there were more important things to worry about than a trivial family feud. So, with the feud settled, Rita once again asked to join the monastery of St. Mary Magdalene. She was accepted in, and it's actually reported that she was levitated to the monastery by the 3 saints that she prayed to help resolve the feud. She was just 36 at this time, and she lived a devoted life at the monastery for the next several decades. Many people came to visit Sister Rita while she was there, and many of those people actually attest to the power of her intercession and prayers, saying that she performed miracles, though unfortunately we lack a lot of the details about those miracles. It's just stories, word of mouth sort of traditions. She developed a particularly strong devotion to the Passion of Christ, and when she was 60 years old, she prayed to him saying, "Please let me suffer like you, divine Savior." And a wound appeared on her forehead, like a wound from a thorn, and it never healed, and it actually caused her discomfort until the day she died. And actually, after she died, it still appeared like a fresh wound. It never appeared old for years after her death. And it is believed that this was a partial stigmata. And for anybody who doesn't know, stigmata is when people devoted to Jesus suffer wounds similar to the ones that he did when he was crucified. There's several accounts of this throughout history, actually. And it's just that people would start bleeding or get wounds on their hands, feet, their head, and or their side, like Christ did. And the scars would be left behind, even though nothing really happened to cause the wound in the first place. They just spontaneously appeared. Rita later came down with tuberculosis, and as she lay sick in bed, her cousin visited, and Rita asked her cousin to go to her home, Rita's home, and bring back a rose. The thing was, this was in January. There aren't a whole lot of roses in bloom in January, or that's what everybody expected. But as her cousin went to Rita's home, a single rose was in full bloom in her garden, and so this rose was brought back to Rita. Now, you might be expecting some miraculous healing story because of this rose, but that's not what happened. Rita passed away 4 months later on May 22nd, 1457. She was buried at the Basilica of Cascia, and in the years after her burial, it was discovered that she was an incorruptible. In fact, her body is in Saint Rita's shrine at Cascia today. Of course, being dead for 600 years as an incorruptible doesn't mean that there's absolutely no damage or deterioration of the body. She has had her face covered with wax and repaired, if you will. But personally, I think at this point they should just lay her to rest in peace finally. And for any listeners or viewers in the Philadelphia area, Rita actually has a national shrine in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It was built in 1907 and has since become a very popular pilgrimage site. There's also a church devoted to Saint Rita in Kerala, India, and it's the only church in Asia to house relics of the saint. There are 2 more miracles that were actually attributed to Rita from heaven. The first is the miraculous healing of Elizabeth Bergamini, who stayed at the convent at Cascia for 4 months, constantly asking for Rita's intercession and healing. And eventually, she was healed. The other miracle is from the abrupt healing of Cosimo Pellegrini in 1887. He suffered from chronic gastroenteritis and an uncurable hemorrhoidal condition. But after seeing a vision of Saint Rita, then at the time Blessed Rita, he woke up the next morning totally cured. Rita was beatified by Pope Urban VIII in 1627 and canonized by Pope Leo XII on May 24th, 1900. She's the patron saint of improbable causes, which that one was actually declared at her canonization ceremony, as well as the patron saint for abuse victims, widows, marriage difficulties, and the sick, which were all attributed to her after her canonization ceremony. Rita's feast day is May 22nd, and she's frequently depicted holding a thorn, a crucifix, or a palm leaf with 3 thorns on it, representing her husband and 2 sons. Now, an interesting thing to note is that she's also frequently depicted in a black habit, but that's not really accurate because the sisters at St. Mary Magdalene Monastery wore beige or brown habits, and it's not really known why he kind of shifted to a black one, other than just probably the general assumption of nuns in black habits. If you have any questions on Saint Rita, please let me know, and I'll do my best to answer them. So what are your thoughts on her? What are your thoughts about the stigmata that she endured and the healing that happened after her death? I hope you find her story interesting because she's a pretty interesting woman. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on Saint Rita, and thank you for listening. If you'd like to support the channel, you can subscribe, download the episode, like, comment, share it with your friends, or even send me a suggestion on a saint to check out by emailing me at sanctifiedpodcast@proton.me. You can find the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Podbean, and more. Just search for the Sanctified Podcast, and I should have a few episodes there. Take care, and I hope you have a wonderful day.